Hey guys, welcome back to Ride JBI. I'm JB. In this video, we are going to answer the common question I get, and that is, who is the most challenging rider to build suspension for? Stay tuned because the answer may surprise you. All right guys, for this video, we got 4 possibilities for what I think is the right answer to the question, who is the most challenging rider to build suspension for? So let's begin with the first one, and that is going to be the beginner rider. Now, most commonly, the beginner rider has little reference to what good suspension is supposed to feel like. So this is going to be one of the biggest hurdles that they are going to encounter when they are new to motocross and off-road riding. They just don't quite know. Also, their technique is likely still developing as well. And because of what can be poor technique, this can really magnify how poorly the bike is handling. And much of the suspension's poor performance and feeling can often be resolved with better technique and riding habits. And lastly on this is we've all seen the beginner rider at the track. Sometimes their overall bike setup can be very questionable. That might be the selection of bars that they have, how their levers are set up, the overall running condition of the bike. And again, a lot of this stems from just their overall lack of experience in the field of riding dirt bikes. And of course, over time, they're going to get better and better with experience, feedback from their friends and other people at the track and or trail, or videos like this, which help share some context and info on what a good setup is. So the best solution for a beginner would be to work with a trainer that they trust, so that way they can better develop their technique and riding skills. This will help eliminate any extra poor performance of the suspension or the bike. And then also work with a suspension company that they trust as well. So that way the suspension company can set up the bike for them and tell them, hey, this is as good as it gets for a rider like you and where you're riding. So trust us that the bike is going to perform as good as it can, and any other feedback you have for the bike, we certainly will take from you. But for the most part, the biggest thing you could do now is learn how to get better on your own. So that way, as your feedback changes over time with your riding technique, you can then give us more accurate and better feedback on how we can further help fine tune and improve your setup. So let's jump to the second rider. That is going to be your local amateur. Now, in this area, they likely have more experience with different styles of suspension tuning. Their young age tends to be very adaptable, and it helps them overcome any poor bike setups that they have. I wouldn't necessarily call this taking accountability when it comes to bike setup. They kind of just don't care. They just want to go fast. And that's something that we often see in the pro ranks when kids turn pro at a young age, is they can just ride the wheels off a bike. And it may not always look pretty, but they got that heart and they got the desire, and they just want to make it happen. Now, some of these amateurs may have a strong bias for a very stiff suspension setup or a very soft suspension setup. And this is often going to come for their experiences from working with other tuners. Some tuners out there heavily favor very comfortable and soft suspension setups that lack bottoming and hold up. Other tuners tend to favor the preference of very stiff suspension. So it is very hard to bottom, has lots of hold up, but is not very comfortable, predictable, or plush to ride. Now, neither of these tuners are wrong in the styles of tuning that they are doing. It's just that each style of tuning had its own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to setting up a bike that way and heavily favoring one of those attributes. Again, being very soft, plush, but having poor bottoming performance, or being overly stiff, having good bottoming performance, but lacking good comfort, plushness, and predictability. At Ride JBI, we do our best to blend all 3 of those characteristics into one setup. So by that, I mean have a comfortable and plush riding bike over the small and medium chop, while also still having good hold up when you're riding fast and aggressively, and still having good bottoming resistance for high impacts and jumps. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be the best in any of those categories, but it's going to have a very strong attribute and amount of that, but none of it too heavily favored in one certain area. Now, you can definitely adjust your clickers if you want an overall softer or stiffer setup. We just feel this gives you the best overall baseline as a rider to work with. Now, of course, we can definitely customize suspension to your own preferences. So if you do prefer an overly stiff setup or an overly soft one, we will happily give that to you. But again, most riders in the beginner and the amateur stages are still very open to learning and feedback, and especially when it comes from a very experienced tuner like myself that has been doing this 20 years, and also relating it to other riders that I have worked with that are maybe pros or very high performing and highly skilled, let's say intermediate riders out there and utilizing their feedback as well on what worked best for them. So are the amateurs the hardest to work with and most challenging? I'd say no, not them either. So next up on our list is going to be the pro rider. So out of the other two options we talked about, the pros and the amateurs, the pro rider likely has the most experience in different styles of suspension tuning. Now, because of this, it may make them a little bit more pickier than other types of riders, because they've certainly as likely have tried suspension that's too soft, very comfortable but bottoms easily. They've likely tried suspension that's been way too stiff, didn't bottom, but it was unpredictable and not plush or comfortable to ride. And then likely at some point in time, they've tried suspension that was just that really good sweet spot for them, and they're really trying to seek that out again. Now, none of those setups are wrong, again, but typically and most commonly, people want that blend of those three attributes of plushness, comfort, good hold up, and good bottoming resistance. Now it was four, but what I meant is comfort and plushness as being one attribute for it. Now, for some of the pro riders, some of their feedback, it can become a little, I would say challenging, but maybe not always accurate or correct, because sometimes they may not be getting the results that they want. So instead of them maybe taking accountability, they will often at times blame the bike. And one of the easiest areas of the bike to blame is often suspension. It's easy to make a fast bike. It's easy to make a slow bike. So not too often do you hear them blaming the motor, but very often you hear about riders blaming that the suspension on the bike is not working to their liking, especially in the pro ranks. One thing to keep in mind is very often a team is not saying, here you go, here's your bike, you have to ride it as is. The setup that a rider shows up on to go race that weekend is very, very likely the setup that they determined was best over many weeks and months of testing before then. Now, it doesn't mean their setup is perfect, but that does mean that it's the setup that the rider chose to have. So you often see riders maybe on podium interviews or off podium interviews, maybe they did not podium, and they're saying how poorly their bike is working. That usually is not a inflection of how well the team works, but maybe an inflection of how poorly of a test rider that rider is. Or maybe they are a good test rider, but they don't know how to accurately articulate what the bike is doing and how to share that to the tuners in order to help them make the proper changes. But I promise you, there's very many times where a rider can love his setup one weekend, go race the next weekend, and not get the results that he wanted. And he's just looking for anything to blame but himself, or maybe not even blame himself, but just has to accept the fact that he just got smoked that weekend by another rider that was riding that much better. So oftentimes you see some lack of accountability. So as you see, there's a lot of similarities in some of the challenges and struggles that the beginner, amateur, and pro riders all may face. But none of them are wrong in what you're seeking out. It's just typically the pro rider, we're going to appreciate and value their feedback a little bit more than an amateur or even a beginner rider, again, because of their experienced riding, whereas we may not put much value on the feedback from a beginner. Certain amateurs have shown to be, they can be some very good test riders as well. What I've learned here at Ride JBI is it's very important to give riders different options to try. They can benchmark them back to back. We have a really neat video. We worked with our friend Parker Shields, where he got to ride his own bike, his KX450, but he got to try our JBI spec Showa forks versus our JBI spec KYB forks. And that helps him understand the differences and how two similar styles of fork can work, meaning they're both twin chamber forks, but they're uniquely different because they're each, one's a KYB and one's a Showa, and how they create and make their twin chamber fork are unique to each other. So each of those forks is going to have its own characteristics and personality. When you give a rider the ability to test those two back to back, it can help them appreciate maybe the setting that they had and the new setting that they're trying, and then also better understand if they maybe want to take what they really liked on setting A and try to apply that more to setting B. So what do we got? So are the pro riders the most challenging to work with? Almost, but I'd say not quite. I think it's going to be our other selection, or the wild card, and it's probably not who you're going to guess it is. Now, it is definitely people that have experience on two wheels, but it tends to be people with experience on two wheels, but not on a dirt bike. This tends to be people that ride street bikes or people that do mountain bikes. Here's what's so challenging about that. is, again, they typically have little to no reference on what good dirt bike suspension is supposed to feel like. Their technique is likely still developing and causing much of the bike's poor handling. And then oftentimes they may have some very questionable bike setups because they're trying to make their bike feel like their street bike or mountain bike feels like, even though the posturing, the technique, and the overall positioning on a dirt bike compared to a street bike or mountain bike is vastly different. This is where the rider falls into the trap of the pattern fallacy. This is a cognitive bias where individuals perceive meaningful patterns and connections in random or unrelated events, data, or settings. So what do I mean by this is they're trying to find parallels with the comfort they have on their sport bike or mountain bike and find a parallel that they can apply that to their motocross dirt bike and go, well, hey man, when I ride my street bike, it feels like this. I need my dirt bike to feel more like this. Want to be direct with you. It's not going to happen. One of the key examples we can point out for the street bikes is tire traction. We'll put up an image of a rider dragging his knee on a street bike in a relatively flat corner. The main reason they can do that was because how much tire traction you guys have and how different the body positioning and overall weight bias of a street bike is. Now, there is nobody out there that can flat corner a dirt bike and drag their knee unless there is some sort of inclined rut or embanked corner to allow the bike to slide on more. Now, so we're going to call out flat track racing. I don't think I've ever seen them slide their knee. Plus, the bike is pivoting around the axis of the front steering stem, changing it. So that's very different than a sport bike. And then for mountain bikes, we have a huge difference in rider versus bike weight ratio. A mountain bike can weigh around 30 to 40 pounds, which is 5 to 6 times lighter than what a dirt bike commonly weighs. Dirt bikes have a range of weighing anywhere between, let's say, 210 pounds for some very light two-strokes, or up to 250 pounds for some of the heaviest 450 four-strokes that are out there. And then, of course, some off-road bikes weigh even more than that. What's really neat about dirt bikes is that it is the one motorsport where the ratio of the weight of the rider and the bike can almost be 1-to-1. Now, it's not exactly. I weigh 160 pounds. My KTM weighs about 235. So it's not quite 1-to-1, but there are other people out there that weigh about 200 pounds. So they're much closer. Even me on a mountain bike being 160, I still heavily outweigh the size of the bike. I bring this up because mountain bikes have some of the leading technology when it comes to suspension. Yes, you heard me right. Mountain bikes have some of the leading suspension technology for two-wheeled bikes. A large reason they can do this is because when you have the weight of the bike being that much less, the amount of stress being placed on the components is much less. So you can build suspension in a way that doesn't have to be as strong or as stiff. Therefore, you can make really unique and innovative suspension setups without having to build in a certain amount of stiffness and overall weight. There's a reason why your fork tubes are so big on your dirt bike, on the upper and lower tubes. They have to have a certain amount of rigidity so they just don't break, collapse underneath the bike when you land from a jump or land from a hard G out while riding in off-road. So because of that, there's definitely some limitations on what we can do with dirt bike suspension. Now, can we add some of that technology in there? Yes, but it'll often come at the expense of added weight. And right now, one of the biggest things in dirt bikes is we're trying to reduce weight as much as we can. So the two things we can really take away for street bike and mountain bikers is that the overall positioning, techniques, and posture on the bike is very different than it is on a dirt bike. Plus, we have the weight differences, the terrain differences for the street guys, and just overall riding style. So you stuck around for the bonus tip, I see. Well, thank you. Now, the advice I'm going to give here is going to be probably some of the best advice that I think all of us suspension tuners can agree on, regardless of the style of suspension that we are building. And by style, I mean how stiff or soft it is on an overall range. And also by style, I mean type of riding. Motocross, off-road, supercross, and arena cross. Commonly, there will be times that a rider is riding, they go, hey man, bike feels great in 90% of the track or the trail, but there's just one key area that I really struggle with. I like to fix that. So can we fix that? You betcha. But oftentimes we have to tune the suspension so drastically different that what happens is, now that we've resolved that 10% track or trail that they are really struggling in, now the bike is excelling there, but now the other 90% of the track or the trail that he's riding in, it has become much more difficult to ride. Or let's just say the bike is no longer working as optimally there as it was before. This is where a rider can himself and make a team begin to go in a circle. Because then he's going to go, okay, guys, bike feels great overall, but it sometimes still bottoms just a little bit when I do the sky shot at Unadilla. So, you know what, man? Understandably, I bet your bike probably does bottom there. That's a pretty big jump. But what we want to take into mind is, are you bottoming and using all your travel and you can still brace the bike well, or is it bottoming so hard that it almost blows your arms off the bike? So there's two different ways of bottoming. If you want to use all your travel, that's okay. And as long as you're not bottoming so hard that it's almost throwing you off the bike, then I would say I would accept that. But in order to make your bike so stiff that it doesn't bottom in that situation, we are definitely going to give up how plush and comfortable it is going to feel over the rest of the track when you go over small and medium bumps. And this will also reduce how well the bike corners as well. But many times riders don't want to hear this. They're just going to tell you, no, I know it can be better. So reluctantly, we will give you what you asked for. We will make the suspension stiffer. We will resolve the bottoming in that one situation. Well, a few weeks later, the riders can go, hey man, I love the bottoming resistance. I can now over jump any jump. I can jump the biggest jump and it never bottoms out. But dude, I'm starting to get arm pump halfway through the moto. I feel every bump. The bike isn't predictable anymore. We need to keep this amount of bottoming resistance, but we need to make it plusher. And that's where we just kind of stare at them and we smile and we nod our head and we go, okay, let's see what we can do. Now, it's not that we don't want to give you that setup. I want that setup. That's why I do suspension to this day, is I love to ride. And I hope to one day somehow open Pandora's box and find the secret code to where we can jump supercross triples, go through the biggest whoops, and then still have it ride like a fucking cloud as we go over cobblestone roads and bricks and rocks and enduro cross tracks. I wish that existed, but it doesn't. Physics has a limitation. How a damper is designed and how it can perform has its own limitation. Now at Ride JBI, you've seen we've designed some really unique and innovative products out there to help limit and reduce this compromise as much as possible. But there is a big reason why we have different styles of setup. We even have our own tuning chart, which it lays out from our softest setting all the way to our stiffest setting. And there's a reason why we have these different specific valving settings, is because unfortunately, I can't just take the clickers and adjust your motocross setting to be as stiff as our supercross setting. The clicker just does not work that way. And there's just not a way to valve it in a way that's going to give you the best of both worlds, or give you a setting that is excellent in motocross, but you can still go do enduro cross, technical single track, really bumpy stuff in. Again, I wish that existed. Just physics and how a damper performs does not allow that wide range of performance or feel. You just have to build a damper a certain way. Why do we often let riders do this, run us an entire circle? Is because at least they get to learn the limitations of suspension. So oftentimes we'll start off with setting A, and it'll tell you, hey man, this is the best blend of comfort, plushness, hold up, and bottoming. We can definitely fine tune it here or there, 5 or 10%, and really not give up too much in any of those areas. But when we begin to go another 15, 20, or 25% more in some of those areas, it's going to come out of compromise. So oftentimes we'll start off with setting A with the rider. He says he likes it. Then we should try setting B, which might be a little stiffer. Then we should try setting C, which is even more stiffer. Now we must go softer again. So now we're back at setting B, but we tell him at setting D. And you know where we end up at? Setting A. And he tells us, this is it, guys. We did it. We found the best blend of everything. And oftentimes, man, as a suspension guy, this is just where we nod our head and we smile and we go, good job, man. Thank you. We've learned from you as well. When in reality, we just went right back to setting A. Now, again, as a suspension tuner, I'm not mad, but other times you wish it would just maybe trust you. And there's gonna be differences in different riders of when we cannot do this. A pro rider has all the resources and time to go through that learning experience. Some of you beginner and amateur riders do not have all those resources and time to go through that same experience, meaning I'll revalve your suspension 4 different times, but it's not going to be for free. So it's going to cost you extra money and time. This is where, when I earlier said, find a tuner that you trust. I still listen to your feedback and I value your feedback, but trust goes both ways. There's going to be certain times where I tell you, hey man, that's as good as it gets. I saw the track, I saw the trail they were riding on, and for the setting that you had, it was performing very, very well. And also take into consideration what other riders were feeling on their own bikes that likely didn't have a suspension setting nearly as good as yours. We're all racing upon the same track or trail, so something to keep in mind. Thanks for staying tuned for this little extra bonus. You kind of get to see me get a little hyped up here. It's something to take not personal, but because I do take it personal. Yeah, I take it personal. So thanks for tuning into this video. Let me know if you thought this was the answer that you were going to expect. If you'd like to have your own suspension done by Ride JBI, there's many ways we can help you out. You can send in your own suspension to Ride JBI, and we'll talk about the year, make, model bike that you have, what options are available, and what settings we can do for you. Or if you're good at doing your own suspension, or you have somebody local to you that can do it, we spend a lot of time developing our own JBI suspension DIY kits, where I'll take the same amount of attention and custom spec that I'll build for you if you sent in your own suspension, and we'll build that up into a very nicely packaged and intuitive and easy to install DIY kit, so you can save money on shipping costs and limit your downtime and quickly get your bike set up with your own JBI spec suspension.